My name is Mary Sham Bogard. I work for the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council as the inclusion coordinator. And one of my tasks is to infuse supported decision-making information in the state of Michigan. So that is why I'm here today. And I'll be co-presenting with Bonnie Gonzalez, and I'll have her introduce herself.
Good afternoon. It's afternoon, yay. So I'm Bonnie Gonzalez. I'm a peer mentor at Health West in Muskegon, and I'm also the DD Council chair.
All right. We also have Vicki Suter, and she is part of the Supported Decision Making Advisory Group, which is a group made up from people from a variety of organizations around the state, including Self Advocates and family members who have come together to talk about this issue and create resources and tools that we can give out throughout the state. So, Vicki, did you have any further introduction that you wanted to make?
I wanted to say thank you for this opportunity for us to be able to present to all of you. I have been working for Oakland Community Health Network for 31 years, and right now I'm the Director of Rights and Advocacy and also lead the effort on supported decision making for Oakland County. So we're really excited to have this partnership with the Development Disabilities Council as well as Oakland Schools to provide you with information and tools to assist individuals to make the choices that they need to make. So thank you for letting us share with you.
Okay. So without any further ado, we're going to start with a video that was created by the advisory group in conjunction with Avalon Films. And it shows individuals from around the state of Michigan and talking about their experiences with supported decision making. The video is 18 minutes long, so you can just kind of sit back, relax, pull out the popcorn. And then after the video, we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about it. Here we go. Is everyone able to hear?
I'm not hearing Mary.
Okay, so usually we watch the video first. It's an 18-minute video put together from a variety of individuals from around the state, kind of sharing their views on guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, and supported decision making. As we said, it's 18 minutes long. We have a variety of ways you can view the video, apparently not the one we're trying today. We also have the video available to individuals on Jump Drive. So in the old-fashioned world of United States mail, we can send you this Jump Drive with the 18-minute video. If you're interested, we'll supply my contact information at the end of the presentation. And if you email me, I will send you that to whatever address you want on a Jump Drive. We'll see if we can also, supply it in a variety of other ways. It is on the DD Council website. We're going to show that toward the end of the presentation, so you can view it there as well. So usually we have a short conversation about the video, and instead we'll go right to the next slide, which is kind of talking about what people's experiences have been with supported decision making. So when we talk to people, this was one parent's experience. The word overwhelmed was the first thing that came to their mind. It's the best term they had to describe how they felt for several years, especially after their son turned 16. So once 16 and from then on, they were continually asked, what are your plans when school is done? So think about that for a minute in conjunction with your own life. We often, as a very young child, start to formulate ideas about what we like, what we don't like, or that age-old question of what do we want to be when we grow up? But somehow for many people with disabilities, this question doesn't get asked or really thought about till much later in life. So this family indicated, this particular parent said, we couldn't really answer. We didn't know or understand what our options were. It wasn't enough to hear about like agencies and services one time. The systems from the school to the adult life were very confusing. Not everyone in a school setting gets to meet people like Vicki who work for community mental health and one of their local adult services before their son or daughter graduates from school or leaves the school setting. So parents often describe it as having too much information at once and not really understanding what to do with it. And this thing called guardianship, most people have heard of that, but not really sure what to think about it. Some of their friends for this particular parents were having a guardian appointed and some were not. And they said, my son's almost 18 and we need help. So one of the reasons the advisory group really wants to talk to people in school settings is because often you're the first individuals that help family to hear that term guardian. And this often happens when a student's turning 17 years of age and IEP forms start to talk about that transfer of rights. And so you give information based on what you've been told. And what we want to do today is supply some additional information so you have all the options in your mind. So when parents may ask you about these questions, you have all the tools at your disposal. So we also spoke to a lot of teachers, and this was one teacher's experience. When a father came to our school, he was under the impression that he was the guardian of his adult son because his son had a disability. So at that point, when we asked him for guardianship papers, he was saying like, well, what do you mean? I don't know what those are. I'm his guardian though, right? Because immediately he wanted to know how to get guardianship. So that often puts school personnel in this awkward situation. Almost like you're being expected to dispense legal advice. And for most educators that we've talked to, that's not a situation they felt comfortable with. So too many parents don't know about the advantage or actually disadvantage of guardianship. They want a resource to contact. They want to find out if they really want guardianship. I think a lot of them don't know much about it. They don't know they need to go to court for it. They don't know if they should or shouldn't. And I'm unsure what to say as an educator. I never had any prep on this. And as this particular teacher indicated, I'm a teacher, not a lawyer. But again, often they felt like they were put in that situation. So again, we want to give you some tools that give you the bigger picture so that you can present that bigger picture to families and point them in the direction of where they can get more in-depth information. So this next slide starts to talk about how this experience has worked in the life of one individual with disability. So Bonnie's going to take over for a few moments and just describe her experience as a young adult, as a youngster, as a person in a school setting, and how this experience has impacted her. So Bonnie, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I had the hard job of remembering where the unmute was. So I just want to take a moment to say, that teachers are not parents and they are not lawyers, but they do play a very important role in all children's lives, whether they have a disability or not, but especially if they have a disability, because that might be the first place a child learns how to advocate. And so I just want to take a moment and share that when I first uh started advocating, I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I was just trying to learn, trying to get some kind of education because um, the messages that I was getting from the people around me, or rather, I should say, I wasn't getting them. My parents were, was that I would never be able to learn or write my name or or any of the things that other kids do. And I would hear these conversations and I would be like, well, that doesn't make sense because I want to do those things. So I would go home and I would ask, well, can I learn how to write my name? And so I wasn't allowed to go to school, and um, I was only allowed to have therapy. And for all intents and purposes, that was my school. And I had to cry and throw a fit. And of course, we now know that's called um, having a behavior. But I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn how to read and write and those things. It wasn't that I didn't want to do the things that people were asking of me, but I also wanted to learn academic types of things. And so finally, the 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 school that I was at, uh, they said, okay, if you go to your therapy and do your exercise for a half hour without complaining or crying, you can learn three new words. And that was how I started my learning process. Now, the difficult part about that was my parents kind of were not involved. They didn't like going. Well, okay, so let me rephrase that, because nobody likes going to IEPs really, or whatever. But they wouldn't come. They wouldn't go. And so it was really up to me to say what I needed. And then that takes even longer because you really need your parent there. And my parents were just kind of didn't want to be a part of that process. So it was really difficult. And then as I got older, um, and people started to understand that, okay, Bonnie can learn, she is capable of these things. Um, it became a different story, and um, I had to give up the things that so it became a thing of versus what did I need versus what did I want. So the adults in my life looked at academics as something that I wanted and therapy as something that I needed. And as I got older, I didn't get as much therapy until it became something that I didn't get at all. And I got to go to school and learn and graduate and do what other kids were doing. But that wasn't a good solution, is what I'm trying to say. And had I had the right people in my corner listening and understanding everything, all the pieces that I needed in my life, I would have had a good balance of both. Right. And so that's um that's why having support in your life and people listening to you is important. And sometimes that's parents and sometimes that's teachers, and in a perfect world it's both. So that's a little bit about what it was like for me going through school. And as I got ready to transition out of like graduating, the message became a little different, more about what life was going to be for me as a um, grown up, as it were. And it was more like, well, now I've done all the steps it takes, but now I don't really um, need to go to college, or what I want to go to college for is not going to be for me. And I don't really need a job because I can be on benefits. And um, not that there's something wrong with that either, if that's what you need or what you want for your life, but that wasn't what I wanted. And I didn't need my own apartment. I could live with family until I was ready for a group home or whatever that next step was going to look like for me. But none of the next steps were any of the steps that I wanted. And 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 shortly after getting out of high school, my mother passed away. So that was tough, right? But a family member of mine sort of was like, "Oh, well, what do we do with Bonnie? I should probably get guardianship of her. That's what we do with Bonnie." And that really scared me, all because here I was sort of making my way in life, not the way that I wanted, but making my way slowly. And now this person wants to come along and sort of get in the way of that, for lack of a better way to put it. And and I knew that um they could very well do that. So that really scared me, because I fought really, really hard to get to where I was in the moment. Although it wasn't where I wanted to be, I was working my way there. And and so I did the only thing that I thought I could do, feeling that I didn't have anywhere to go or anywhere to turn. I left the country and I went to Mexico. Now, in hindsight, many, many years later, that's a little backwards from what everyone usually does. Everyone usually comes here, not go somewhere else. But that's what I needed to do. And I took some time to heal and um, uh, do some things that I needed to do. And then I uh, came back, and that was many years ago. So obviously I did some more growing and some more learning. And the point is, if I had just sat back and let that happen, none of who I am now, or who I was able to become, I, I don't think it would have happened, because now I own my own home. I've been in a long-term relationship with my boyfriend. Um, uh, I'm employed full time, along with being the DD Council chair. I'm also interpreting as part of my role because of that experience, which I wouldn't have done before. I'm back in school. I also am an ambassador for the Charting the Life course, which we'll be talking about a little bit more later. And as we go through this presentation a little bit more, you'll realize a little bit more how much all of these things would have been impossible had I sat back and said, well, okay, this is I'll just go along with what's about to happen. Maybe running across to another country was a little extreme, but it was what I needed to do for me. It's not what in any of my roles what I advise people to do, because there's other ways we do things differently, and I definitely try to find or be that support for other people. But yes, people having supported decision making is very important, because it's really all about, first and foremost, starting with hearing what it is that they want. More than likely, it's going to go along with what they need to.
Okay. Thank you, Bonnie, for sharing that. Before we start talking about what are the main concerns that people have when they start to think about guardianship for a person, I just want to make sure there aren't any questions for Bonnie. And Matt, I don't have access to the chat right now, so if there's any questions, you can write them in the chat, or that you might want to ask Bonnie, or anybody that wants to share from their experience with working with families on that conversation about guardianship and transfer of rights that comes up. Anybody like to share?
And I'll monitor the chat and relay any questions.
Because I'm interested in knowing more about the educator's perspective and what are the kind of questions that families bring to you about this.
I have a question. I have a student that would like to be on her own, but mom tends to use her to babysit other individuals. She'd like to come back to school, but she has been told she has to do virtual. Her mom is her guardian, and what kind of choice or decisions can she make even though she has a guardian?
Okay. So supported decision-making can be used even in a guardianship situation. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So I would really recommend kind of introducing that individual and her family to that concept. And then we can also talk about some resources at the end that you could direct that individual or the family to. There's different resources depending on whether they're supported by a community mental health or if there are other advocacy organizations in the area, and we can kind of talk about organizations that might help that family kind of work through some of those issues. I saw a question come up about how does this work for individuals with who are, what I would say, have higher and more complex needs. And we'll talk about that too a little bit as the presentation goes on. In the video, that's a common question that we get because people have an easier time seeing this working in the lives of individuals who are able to speak and communicate verbally in English versus individuals who maybe use their behavior to communicate. And so on the video, there is an individual shown. She is an adult now. When I worked with her, she was a young adult, 18, and she wasn't somebody that communicated verbally. Her parents have never had guardianship of her. She's now in her 40s. She has a full-time job, or I shouldn't say a full-time job. She has a job in the community, but she's gone from full-time to part-time as she's gotten older. And she's had major surgeries. It's never been an issue that she needed to have a guardian, but supported decision-making was used to help the circle of people around her, including her family, figure out what were the best supports and services to help her. And so we're going to be talking about one tool that you can use, the Life Course, as Bonnie mentioned. And that's a way that you can help individuals at any level of skill of communication It's good for people without disabilities to it's a tool that companies can even use to think about long-term and short-term goals. So we're going to talk more about that. Are there any other questions from the chat, Matt, that I'm not seeing?
No, just a comment shared by Susan Watson. I would like to comment how amazing she is. I'm sure referring to Bonnie. The idea that she didn't want what her team and family felt she was able to do. She chose her own path. I hope to be able to help my students express their desires. Thanks for sharing, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I concur with that. Bonnie's one of the most amazing women I know. I've gotten to know her over the last 3 or 4 years, although I'd heard about Bonnie before that. So it's been my pleasure to work with her as a co-presenter for the last couple of years, and was thrilled to find out that the governor appointed her as DD Council Chair. So now we get to work even more closely. So let's talk for a minute about what are some of the concerns people have. And some of those have been voiced in some of the questions that we have heard about already. So a lot of times people think about, what if somebody has higher and more complex needs? How will they make decisions about their education? How will they communicate decisions about what they want for their education? So that's a big piece. And again, this often comes up when they talk about transfer of rights at 18. But every school setting has some sort of option. I can't address the particular form that Oakland County uses, that a student who's turning 18, because we all know between 18 and 26, they could still be receiving public school education. They can sign a form, a release form, indicating that they want their family to continue to be involved and they want their family to have access to their educational record. They want their family or people outside their family who are a trusted circle of support to be part of their IEP process. So there's lots of things that can address these concerns outside of removing somebody's civil rights by taking guardianship. Another issue is safety. And we often talk about the importance of thinking about what the guardianship would really address. People with guardians get hit by cars. People with guardians date the wrong people. People with guardians have financial issues. Sometimes people with guardians are abused by their guardians financially. We know situations like that. So having a guardian doesn't necessarily keep you any more safe than other supports might. And so we encourage people to look at other supports first, always thinking about that least restrictive intervention and the intervention that maximizes the individual's autonomy in their life. Because there's a lot of new research that talks about the more self-determined and the more autonomous person is, not only the happier they are mentally healthy, but also physically healthy. So these are not just concepts, there's research that backs it up. Another area is medical decisions. I can't go anywhere with my brother. We joke about 10 feet inside of a hospital. They immediately start to talk about he needs to have a guardian or he can't give informed consent. So there's a lot of things that can be put in place, again, shy of guardianship, that can help a person to make medical decisions. So we'll talk about that. Finance is another one. Again, there are hundreds of things that can be put in place to support families and individuals to handle finances. Communication, as was brought up in one of the questions, a lot of times if an individual doesn't speak verbally in English, we assume guardianship is needed, when sometimes it's simply assistive technology that can be used, interpreters, or therapists who can kind of help the circle of support to identify what behaviors are trying to communicate. So again, the people best suited to understand somebody's communication are people that have spent the most time with that individual, who know and love them. So we'll talk about that more as we move on. Sexuality is another one. And as one person on our video talks about from Midland County, and she's on the video also with the probate judge from Midland County. And she was brought up on the stand in a case of guardianship. And the issues where people thought this person needed a guardian were that they were afraid she would get involved in unhealthy relationships or make bad relationship choices, and she would make bad financial decisions. And so the ARC of Midland County was there, and she got on the stand and said to the judge, well, I'm divorced. I've made some bad relationship decisions. I've bounced a check before. I've made some bad decisions about finances, but nobody's ever questioned guardianship for her. And so it's this kind of idea that we can't hold people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to a different standard than we all hold ourselves. And then this other aspect is the legal aspect. They're going to need help understanding contracts or decisions. And I think if you think for a moment, if you've ever purchased a house or a car, did you read the entire 15, 20 or more page contract or mortgage before you signed? Probably not. Not too many people do. So we all need some support. And we also kind of advocate for thinking about this as the typical life of an adult. Somehow we always think we need to have a separate procedure for people with disabilities, when really there are things out there to support all of us to make decisions. And we all use a circle of support that we trust when we make big decisions in our lives. And we encourage you to kind of work with families to think about it from that aspect. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide.
Before we go on, I would just like to add one thing.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
So I just want you guys to think about this throughout our presentation. Think about how when you're told what you're gonna do and how that makes you feel versus when you're making a decision as a family or in a partnership and how that feels differently. Just think about that throughout the rest of the day, how that goes over differently and what the outcome is. Just that's all I wanted to say. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. It's an important point. So we wanted you to have an idea of what this looks like in Michigan versus the rest of the country. So this is data from the National Core Indicators, and it includes people with intellectual disabilities that were interviewed by National Core Indicators. And there's a variety of questions that they're asked. And based on their contact with their community and their integration into their community. And one of the questions several of the questions refer to guardianship. So looking back in 2013 and 14, this first bar, guardianship was over 70% of those interviewed had guardians. And for purposes of this data set, that combines both partial and full plenary guardianships. So we'll talk more about that. And then you see it continue to grow throughout 2014, 2015 and 16. And 2016 and 17, there was just a very slight decrease. And then we see a rather large jump in 2017 and 18. So over 80% of people who were interviewed for National Core Indicators had either partial or full plenary guardians. And you find out later in the presentation, if a guardianship is granted by a judge, it's far more likely to be a full plenary guardian. And that is because in a partial guardianship, it gets reviewed every 5 years. And so it's easier for a probate court to do a full plenary guardianship because it doesn't have to be brought back before the court every 5 years. So think about that conflict of interest that's there in a court situation. We'll also talk about that more in the next couple of slides. In comparison, in 2017 and 18, again, over 80% of people interviewed in Michigan had guardianships. Nationally, at the same time, it was just over 40%. So we're almost double the national average. This next slide shows that in just more concrete detail. So 81% have a guardian based on National Core Indicator data from 2017 and 18. And nationally, 43% of those individuals interviewed from other states had guardians. So we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Why are guardians so much higher in number in Michigan? I don't necessarily have an answer for that. A lot of it's because it's the way it's always been done and it hasn't been questioned. So as Bonnie pointed out in her own life, it really was just the only option given, you know, guardianship or nothing, or you're on your own, rather than talking about other supports, less intrusive, less restrictive things. So that's typically what happens to many individuals with disabilities. So the process of guardianship, Bonnie, do you want me to go ahead or you want to take this one?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so we want people to understand the process is a lot more lengthy than some people realize. Hence, that parent that came to an instructor or a teacher and said, well, I'm his guardian, right? Because he has a disability. It's more extensive than that. And that teacher was right to ask, well, I need to see your guardianship papers. So a guardianship is a legal process. There are costs, there are timeframes, there are court hearings involved in this process. So a petition can be filed. It's filed with probate court in the county where the individual lives. There are two processes. One process is for adults, older adults, and the law that governs that is called EPIC. And that is a process when seniors, people start to determine that maybe they are losing some of their ability to understand, and they might apply for a guardianship of a parent or a grandparent. The other process is for adults with developmental disabilities. And the law in Michigan that governs that is the Mental Health Code. So there's two totally different processes, and the laws don't match. A senior citizen has more rights than an individual with a developmental disabilities, and that process is slightly different. But in either case, the date of a hearing is set. So a judge can determine just by the petition whether a person needs an emergency guardianship. So it's either granted or denied on a temporary basis, and there's a time frame by which a hearing has to happen. Then the date of the hearing is set if they've not denied it. At the hearing, an evaluation will be presented in court, and that's followed by a physical health statement. It's important for educators to know that sometimes courts access information from a student's file, from a young adult's file, and that information is used as an evaluation. We've seen time and time again when we're presenting to educators that they had no idea until after a court situation that something they had written were used in the court. So a notice of hearing is sent out to everyone, distributed to the alleged ward and other parties. And in different counties, this is interpreted somewhat differently. the immediate family. Sometimes educators are told, sometimes they're not. So it's important to understand this process so you know if you want to help that student and help the family to understand this whole process, that you would be notified if there's a court hearing pending. There's an appointment of attorney for the alleged ward. There's a hearing and a court determination. Now, this sounds like a lot of legal stuff, but in reality, I've been to many guardianship hearings that lasted less than 5 minutes. Oftentimes, the alleged ward is sitting there in the hallway, and a person in a suit with a briefcase comes along and says, "Is there a Bonnie Gonzalez?" and introduces them to her. "Hi, Bonnie, I'm your lawyer. I'll be representing you. Now let's head on into court. You really don't need to say anything unless the judge specifically asks you questions." They're in and out in 5 minutes or less, and a full plenary guardianship is often granted. So it's not a process where they have a lot of time to talk to their attorney, typically that's court appointed. I've seen this happen time and time again, and I've worked in this field in Michigan for 40 some years at this point. So in the court, the petition is either dismissed. In other words, the judge is saying this person does not need a guardian, or they can appoint a full plenary guardian or a partial guardian. Now, again, as I already said, most situations they grant a full plenary guardianship if it's a guardianship at all. Far more, well over three quarters of the time. And we think a lot of that reason is because in a partial, again, they have to come back before court every 5 years. Now, in either case, if a guardianship is granted, there is an annual report to file. Many times families don't realize that. And so they do have to file papers talking about the amount of time the guardian spent with the individual and verify for the court that they've provided all the necessary things that are required of a guardian. And we'll talk more about those a little bit later. And we've cited here, it's Michigan compiled law and the number, if that's something that you'd like to look up. Bonnie, do you want to do this? Or you want me to keep going?
So there are different types of guardianships. There's the guardianship of the person, there's the guardianship of the estate, and then there's the conservatorship. And then there's scope of guardianship. Plenary, which is a full or total guardianship, and then partial, which is a limited guardianship. Or there can be a combination of plenary and limited guardianships.
So I would just add to that, sort of, these terms are often used interchangeably. So we wanted to present all the terms that you might be hearing, but also to clarify a little bit. So guardian of the person means somebody who can make decisions about housing, could make decisions about school programming. Guardianship of an estate would be somebody who makes decisions about signing contracts or financial matters or property that belong to the individual. The word conservatorship really only legally applies to that other group of people that we mentioned, seniors, and is covered in the EPIC law. So that's a phrase that kind of is only for that population, but often people use that interchangeably, and its counterpart would be guardianship of the estate. Then the term full guardian or plenary guardian are often interchangeable, and partial and limited are often interchangeable. And this last point is put there because a judge literally can write whatever they want in a guardianship paper. So there was a study done by a professor at Saginaw Valley State University where they looked at what actual guardianship papers said, And those are public information. So you as an educator could access the guardianship papers for any of the students that you have by requesting that from probate court. And it's important that you kind of know what's in there, because oftentimes people act as though there's much in there that really isn't. So an example would be a partial guardian who acts in the capacity of a full guardianship, because it's often not questioned. Now, they may be intentional or unintentionally doing that because they misunderstood what their role was in the person's life. But it's good to take a look at that and to help for you to know and to help the student to know what are the laws that govern their life.
Mary, before we go on, I want to ask, there's teachers, so I would like to flip the script a little bit and ask them a question if they wouldn't mind answering in the chat. Just now that we've explained it, what comes to mind? What could be something else put in before we give you an example later on? What could be something else put in place instead of a guardianship? I don't care if you unmute. Exactly.
Power of attorney,
Yeah.
a sponsor, again, power of attorney. So excellent. My brother actually has a medical power of attorney, and that's a person that helps him make only medical decisions. That person cannot decide how much money he spends. We had somebody else just write in the chat a conversation with a person they trust. So really, it's kind of flipping things on their head. We've often in Michigan, as those statistics showed, go to the most restrictive or intrusive thing, which is a full plenary guardian, removing of somebody's civil rights, when having a conversation with a circle of support or a group of trusted people could help that person make decisions in a safe way. So excellent. Good question, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Okay. So these are potential rights that are in jeopardy in a full plenary guardian. In a partial guardianship, it could be any portion of these. Bonnie, you want to go through these?
So deciding where to live, consenting to or preventing any medical or healthcare treatment, determining when and how to travel, spending money, making changes in educational or vocational programs, participating in legal issues such as contracting or filing lawsuits, buying or selling property, giving permission to have a picture taken and shown for publicity purposes. So think about that for a moment, especially in these times, having to get consent for medical treatment right now. If we had to do that, especially right now, right, Vicki, purchasing a cell phone, because if it's not prepaid, you have to sign a contract, and you can't do that if you have a guardian. And if you do somehow get around that, the guardian has the right to terminate that. So,
Right.
I often joke when we do these presentations that I wouldn't be able to do all the things that I do if I had a guardian. If that family member had been able to go through their plans, I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do, because before COVID, I was constantly being asked to have my picture taken for various things that the DD Council does. Right, Mary?
I would be spending most of my week chasing down Bonnie's guardian to get approval to do something that she's already agreed and expressed a desire to do.
Yeah,
That's literally what would happen
right now, for sure.
And think about, in this day and age, we've had guardians who have decided that having cable is not important. And what's the critical thing that's connected to cable? Internet access. So imagine students whose guardian determined that wasn't an important thing. And I will tell you, guardianship is so entrenched in Michigan. This happened to my brother, that his payee, he doesn't have a guardian, his payee, who is a payee through the local CMH, determined cable was not that important. And then I get the call when he's very frustrated with his staff because he can't watch football game because he doesn't have cable anymore. So again, decisions were made about what was or wasn't important in his life by people who didn't know him. So it's really important that we think about surrounding the individual with people that know them the best, and those people helping to make good decisions. And so ultimately that individual retains that right in supported decision-making versus guardianship. So we want to move on because we're only going to be presenting until 2. Here's what the comment about supported decision-making is. We all make decisions. We all need supporters every day of our lives, helpers and consultants in our lives in order to make good decisions, whether we have a disability or not. So if you just think for a moment, and if some people can write in the chat, what is a decision you rely on other people to help you make? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I suspect some of you probably have somebody help you do your taxes, or you have a financial consultant. If you could just list a few other in the chat. Any decisions that you have other people, financial advisor, what type of car to buy, an insurance agent. Exactly. So we all have trusted people that help us to make decisions. I missed that last one. Caseload at work, what type of laptop to buy. Missed a few of them. They flash on my screen very briefly. So you get the idea. We all have people. And what we're asking people to think about is for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. A retirement counselor, exactly. So rather than have a separate system for people with IDD, look at those things that are available in our communities already. So the main difference between guardianship and supported decision-making is that in a guardianship, they're substituting a decision maker, a person, and it limits the rights, the choices, and the freedoms of the individual. One now deceased senator declared it that I apologize, I lost my earbud there for a moment. That a person under full plenary guardianship in the U.S. had less rights than a convicted felon. And the only thing more restrictive in the U.S. in terms of criminal justice was the death penalty. So they basically have no rights in a full plenary guardianship. I will tell you, though, laws vary from state to state. And one thing that an individual with a disability under full guardianship can still do in Michigan is vote. So that is a right retained here. Now, as opposed to that, supported decision-making is a process that enables people with disabilities to retain and exercise their rights and make and communicate choices in regard to personal and legal matters. So there's basically 5 steps. Starting the conversation with the family and the student, having that individual and helping that individual to identify who is willing and able to assist as a member of their circle of support, planning and communicate what are the areas where this person needs support. 4 is setting up an agreement, and that could be set up as a formal or an informal agreement. We're going to talk more about those later and show you some examples. And then letting everybody know. That's very important. Somebody asked me to repeat. If you just want to unmute and ask the question.
Yes, hi, that was me, Wendy. I was just a question just came up in my building recently about individuals that have full plenary guardianship over their students at our building. What is that? What are the rules around voting?
Okay, we have a whole nother presentation and I have a one-page information sheet. So if somebody has a full plenary guardian, they're still entitled to vote. And there's lots of accessible voting options available, including vote by mail. So Wendy, I would ask that you take down my contact information and email
Thank
me
you.
after the presentation and I'll send you all of that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Great question. Very pertinent right now with a major election coming up. Okay, so I'm going to turn the floor over to Bonnie. As a life course ambassador, she's the best person to talk about this. I will mention down at the bottom left-hand side of the screen are two, because we're going to kind of do a short version of this because we just have until 2. But we want you to know where to get information. And as we go more in this series, we're going to be providing more in-depth information about some of these tools. So again, you might want to jot down those 2 websites as Bonnie's talking. Okay, take it away, Bonnie.
So I'll start with the 2 websites. The one is lifecoursentools.com and the other is michigan.gov/DD Council.
And I'll just add the video we weren't able to show today is on our website. So you can click on it and view the 18-minute video.
Okay, so I love these tools because, as Mary stated earlier, they're for anyone, not for just people with disabilities. So what I would really like is for you guys to hopefully go on the website and grab them and use them yourself and see how it goes. So I've done one for myself on something that I really wanted to accomplish. So if we could start with the star over here, you'll see that it has different colored points. And for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to be talking about safety and security supported decision making, because that seems to be a key thing that people worry about and why people think that individuals need guardianship. I was trying to think of how I wanted to say that. And as we've already discussed, that, you know, we all can make poor decisions about anything, walking down the street in the dark. So for the purposes of this presentation, that's what's going to be in the middle of this star. And at the top, the light blue is the personal strengths and assets. So you would put in this triangle what personal strengths and assets the person has to in regards to safety and security. Sorry, the screen is small. So for the examples, we have the ability to communicate, their wants and needs. Mary, can you see it better?
Okay, so then it goes into money management.
Right.
Understanding the concept of money was put on this individual's plan.
And personal safety.
Yep.
So knows address, phone number. So those are some examples for personal strengths and assets. Those are just examples of what someone would put there. Then moving over one, we have relationships. Now, for this, these would be,
Do you want me to read them off, Bonnie?
yeah, because I'm having a hard time seeing what this.
Personal contract or agency agreement. So that would be a relationship between an agency and the individual or the student in a school. Power of attorney, general power of attorney for healthcare, support or shared decision-making. So just identifying who are the relationships in this person's life. Money management could involve like a joint banking account. So again, as Bonnie encouraged you, if you take one of these and start thinking about it in your own life, or present these as options for students and families to use, that's something that you could do as well.
Right.
Getting them to think about their long-term goals.
Right. And I strongly encourage you to do it yourself first, because it will really help you put it in perspective. I've done it at Health West in team meetings to get the staff to understand before I have them do it with individuals that they work with. Moving down one, the next one is eligibility specific. Now, when I do this one-on-one or when I'm training someone else, I always save this one for last. And because of time constraints, I'm just going to tell you why. I do this one last because I really want people to think about everything else that they have in their life before they think about the services that they want to incorporate. I really want them to see that their life is richer than what they maybe realize coming through the door, right? So
It's a very interesting thing to think about paid and unpaid supports
right,
and the connection the individual has to both paid supports and those people in their lives who are unpaid support. And think about that in your own life as well.
and when I do this with the folks that I work with, the light bulb that happens for them, and because a lot of them come through the door feeling alone, and then when we do this exercise, they just sort of light up and they feel like, oh my gosh, I can accomplish this. So it's really very powerful. Can you go through and read the headings for eligibility specific, because people really do get stuck on this?
Okay. They talk about decision-making, money management, and personal safety. So that could be a personal care or direct care worker, could be adult protective services. It really just depends on the individual's life. Decision-making could be a service coordinator, a teacher, a therapist. It could be a plenary or limited guardianship or a payee-ship. So really just looking at what are the least restrictive things a person needs. And it's going to look different for everyone. As one of the early questions was, how does this look in the life of somebody with higher and more complex needs? They may need more support, but that doesn't necessarily still mean they need a full guardianship. And when you think about it, if somebody's needs are so severe that they need somebody with them 24 hours a day, why would they need a guardian? Because there's going to be somebody with them to help them make decisions 24 hours a day. So then we go over to community-based, Bonnie.
Right. And so one thing that I like to point out is relationships and community-based can cross over, but community-based is thinking about you don't have to meet a certain criteria to utilize community-based, whereas eligibility specific, you may. Okay.
Okay.
Can you go ahead and read some of those examples, Mary?
So under decision-making, it could be a medical advisor, a doctor or nurse, clergy or a life coach, financial advisors, educational advisors like a teacher or counselor. Money management could be a limited bank account, direct deposit, automatic bill payments. And then neighbors, police under personal safety, fire, assistive technology can greatly enhance the independence of a person and keep them safe, and emergency medical responders. So this last category is technology.
Right. And technology doesn't necessarily mean the electronics and computers that we think about every day when we think about technology, but that is often the first go-to that people think of. So really trying to think outside the box with this one is important. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next slide. We know that the video is now available, and these forms will also be made available on the website for the district. This next section of the presentation, just going to kind of run through very quickly because it really kind of just names some of those tools that can be used in supported decision making. So I want to save a good 5-10 minutes at the end for questions, and then we're going to point out ways you can watch the video at your leisure. So again, a circle of support can be made up of family and friends, people from their community. It could include teachers, employers, caregivers, co-workers, community members, and organizations, and sometimes paid staff. And again, we usually do some activities that help you think about who are the supporters in your circle, in your life. You mentioned some of those earlier. So that's the least restrictive thing, is just having the person or the student think about who are the supporters in their life and bringing those individuals together to talk about that person's hopes and dreams for their future. We talked about assistive technology. We can provide more information on any of these tools at future events. We have whole half-day presentations down to like 1-hour presentations on all the assistive technology available to help people be as inclusive as they want to be in their community and be safe. Person-centered planning, again, that's part of law in Michigan for people who are supported by behavioral health and community mental health situations. It's required by both state and federal law. And there's lots of resources, and we can do future presentations on these areas that you want to know more about. And we're going to ask about that in the chat at the very end. Which are the next few areas of supported decision that you want to delve into and take a deeper dive? Self-determination. And again, studies show that the more self-determined a person is in their life, the happier they are, the both mentally healthy and physically healthier than people who are less self-determined in their life. We talk about release of information forms, both in a school setting and in a community setting. Virtually every major organization has some sort of release of information form. Rather than removing somebody's civil rights, we can often just involve a form. And we'll talk about where you can find those in future resource sections. Power of attorney's been mentioned. You can have a medical power of attorney or durable power of attorney. Durable just means it's based on a certain set of parameters for a specified period of time or under certain circumstances that the power of attorney kicks in. And it specifies what that power of attorney has authority over, and it's reversible without going back through court, unlike a guardianship. The medical power of attorney we mentioned. So again, start making mental notes of which of these areas you want to know more about. And we can set up future presentations based on those desires to take the deeper dive on those particular topics. Representative payee is a payee or a person or an agency, could be an organization that helps a person manage their benefits through the Social Security Administration. Now, that term payee is often used in other areas as well. Some people just choose to have an informal payee, not just for their benefits, but also for maybe money they're making through work or a micro enterprise. So we can talk more about how those can be used to support an individual, again, at future presentations. There's a whole myriad of very informal banking arrangements, joint accounts, bill paying services, automatic payment withdrawals, fiscal intermediaries. All of those are things and tools that circles can surround a person with. You've probably heard of special needs trust and ABLE accounts. Again, we can provide you with more information and a speaker just on this topic. Here's what TASH, which is a national organization, says. Bonnie, you want to take this one or you want me to keep going?
I'll take it. We all make decisions, big and small, every day. We take for granted that we have the right to exercise such autonomy over our lives, and that we often have a network of trusted friends and allies with whom we consult to make important decisions that affect our lives. This is not always the case for people with disabilities.
Right. And even the National Guardianship Association says that supported decision-making should be considered before guardianship, and the supported decision-making process should be incorporated as a part of a guardianship if the guardianship is necessary. So in the question that was asked earlier for that student that has a pulmonary guardianship, a circle of support around that student could help by helping them to understand, giving them that supported decision-making tool and helping them understand how that could be used even within a guardianship situation. Again, this is law. It's Michigan compiled law. It's in Chapter 6. It says the guardianship should be utilized only as necessary to promote and protect the well-being of the individual and shall be designed to encourage the development of maximum self-reliance and autonomy in the individual. This is not what we see with most full plenary guardianships. It's rare to see supported decision-making used within a guardianship. So I'm just going to flip back by this one very quickly. I wanted to show this graphic, which just kind of, again, gets you to think about, we often jump to the most restrictive thing of guardianship, see down at the bottom left, and we less often go to the least restrictive of a student making their own decision as an autonomous adult, or just surrounding them with a circle of support, or providing person-centered planning, or life course tools to help them think about their long-term goals. But again, each of these rectangles have hundreds of levels within each of them of types of making their own decision, types of banking services, going from least to more restrictive. This was a comment by Maya Angelou. And when I think about guardianship in Michigan and I see those statistics, and I've worked in the field and seen many of these situations throughout the years, excuse me, she has said, do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. So guardianship's the only thing Michiganders have known for generations. But now we know better. Now we know we have all these other less restrictive and intrusive tools to use, and we need to think about using them. This just shows some resources, again, some more web pages that you can access. You can access information about this from your local ARC chapter. You can get on the Michigan Alliance for Families webpage. They have examples of forms that families can use. There is no one specific form that's written into law in Michigan, but those are examples that they can look at and tweak to work for their needs. Excuse me. Or the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council webpage. And these are put in the chat. And in that, on that web page, you can view the videos. There's a 3-part video. They're also on the OCTA website. So the 3-part video is from 2018 Supported Decision Making Summit, which was an all-day event, and we had national presenters there talking about the topic. So again, it's something you could point families to or colleagues.